If everyone could tweet out the link, that would be great. Thank you guys, and welcome all to Teaching as Social Justice, the 7th in our University Worth Fighting For series. Today's conversation will explore how teaching can address the unequal distribution of resources, wealth, privilege, and opportunity along axes of race, gender, sexual orientation, and ability. My name is Danica Savanek, and I'm a doctoral candidate in English and a Futures Initiative Fellow here at the CUNY Graduate Center. I'm very honored to welcome you all to this event and to introduce our distinguished panelists and our invited respondent. I want to also thank those of you who are joining us via live stream and Twitter, and invite you all to tweet this event using the hashtags FightForEDU and Teach for Justice. You can also send your questions for the panelists there, and we will field questions. We also have a public Google Doc that's being circulated where we have notes on today's event and where you can find additional information about events related to this topic, most notably the Teach at CUNY Day, which is happening on May 2nd. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, this event is organized by the Futures Initiative, which advances equity and innovation in education and promotes reinvestment in higher education as a public good. Today's discussion is the final event in our series for this year, The University Worth Fighting For, which ties student-centered, engaged pedagogical practices to institutional change, diversity, equality, and social justice. And so before I introduce our extraordinary panelists, I want to briefly say a few words about how I came to my own investment in this topic. I arrived at the Graduate Center in 2012 with a desire to study Marxism, but quickly realized when I started teaching at Queens College that all of the questions ask about material distribution, structures of injustice and inequality, and cultures of oppression and survival were present and palpable in the classroom. It was in the classroom that my experiences with the Occupy movement and its offshoots, with Black Lives Matter, with organizations attempting to counter institutional racism and sexism, came together with my interest in the work of thinkers like Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, and Fred Moten and Stefano Harney. Inspired by my teaching experiences, my dissertation research focuses on feminist, anti-racist, and queer pedagogical praxis, especially as it emerges through the literary and cultural texts of 4 activist scholars, authors, and educators, Audre Lorde, Adrienne Rich, Toni Cade Bambara, and June Jordan, all of whom taught here at CUNY. Not unlike the panelists sitting before us today, their work consistently challenges us to imagine education beyond neoliberal narratives and to think about pedagogy in relation to social change. It encourages us to ask difficult questions such as, how liberatory can education be in a carceral racial state? What can education do to materialize social justice and not just pay lip service to multiculturalism and diversity, but be part of the downwardly redistributive revolution we so desperately need? In these times of manufactured scarcity and austerity, how can we develop practices to counter the everyday pedagogies of structural violence and dispossession? In the weeks leading up to this event, I've been thinking a lot about the preposition as that joins the work of teaching to that of social justice in this event's description. While the event could have easily been called teaching social justice, it isn't, which led me to wonder, what would teaching social justice look like? Does it mean teaching cultural history, the history of labor movements, structural critique, Black studies, ethnic studies, queer theory, and women's studies? And how does one teach these subjects, which are, I think, less about memorizing facts and figures, and more about cultivating certain attitudes towards the present and the status quo, understanding its radical inadequacy, its unfairness and injustice, its mutability, as well as desiring and enacting change. In my mind, that little as does some important metaphorical work. It reminds us simultaneously of the distinctness of these two terms, teaching and social justice, while also extending an invitation to do something different or differently. It suggests that as educators, we don't have to abide by the pedagogies, methodologies, and structures we have inherited, those that, more often than not, perpetuate hierarchies of privilege and power. Instead, it reminds us that within and beyond formal classrooms, wherever teaching happens, we have the opportunity to do something different or differently. And with that in mind, I want to introduce and turn the conversation over to our distinguished speakers and our invited respondent, who we thank so much for being with us today. We will hear first from Prithi Kanakamedala, Assistant Professor of History at CUNY's Bronx Community College. Dr. Kanakamedala's work as a public historian includes the major exhibit, Brooklyn Abolitionists, which examines anti-slavery activism in early Brooklyn. She has worked with Brooklyn Historical Society, City Lore, Eastville Heritage Center, and the Museum of the City of New York. Next, we will hear from Anne Balsamo, Dean of the School of Media Studies and Professor of Media Studies at the New School. In July, she will become the inaugural Dean of the School of Arts, Technology, and Emerging Communications at the University of Texas, Dallas. She is one of the founding members of Haystack and co-founder of FemTechNet. Dr. Balsamo's work includes projects like the AIDS Memorial Quilt, a memorial designed to foster healing, raise awareness, and inspire action around HIV/AIDS. Following Anne, we will hear from Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics, and Professor of Geography and Earth and Environmental Sciences here at the CUNY Graduate Center. Dr. Gilmore's work traverses a wide range of social justice topics, from racial and gender inequality to the environment and the criminal justice system. Professor Gilmore has served as the president of the American Studies Association. She is recipient of numerous honors, including the 2012 Angela Davis Award for Public Scholarship. She was a founding member of Critical Resistance, the California Prison Moratorium Project, and other grassroots organizations. And finally, we will hear from our invited respondent, Allison Guess, a PhD student in Earth and Environmental Sciences and a Futures Initiative Fellow here at the Graduate Center. Allison's research and community development interests include deliberate Black land constructions and Black people's relationships to those lands and places, specifically as they relate to voluntary reverse migration, racial capitalism, anti-Black racism, and collective liberation. So in terms of the format for the event, each of the speakers and our respondent will have 8 minutes, and I will keep time, and I'll flash a little 2-minute sign and a little 1-minute sign. Okay? So we'll hear first from Professor Kanakamedala. Would you like me to go to the mic?
Yes, please use the mic. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Futures Initiative for inviting me, to Kathy and Katina and the whole team that I've been emailing back and forth with. As you might hear from my accent, I grew up in England. I'm from Liverpool, England originally, and I say that because so much of what I do as a historian, I'm often both translating the work that I'm doing, but also translating the words that I'm using. And I think that has played a huge role in the kind of work that I do. In terms of my scholarly work, I graduated from the University of Sussex with a PhD, in which I looked at the Black Atlantic 19th century popular culture and how that had sort of worked its way across the Caribbean, North America, and Britain. And then I actually started working as a historian, which was a huge shift, I think, in the way in which I did my work. And that's not to knock in any way my graduate education, but my first real job, after temping for a few years, my first job out of grad school was working for a public history project called In Pursuit of Freedom. And it was a project put together by the Brooklyn Historical Society, Weeksville Heritage Center, and Irondale Ensemble Project. And all they knew was they wanted to do a public history project that commemorated anti-slavery activism in Brooklyn. And they wanted a bunch of things that sound awesome on a grant proposal, but a historian's nightmare. They wanted place markers, they wanted K-12 curricula, they wanted a theater production, they were going to have what was the other thing? We were going to have 3 exhibits. We were going to have a scholarly book that came out of it. So when I say I did history, I really did do history. A lot of what I was doing while we were doing the research was going into spaces that are not considered traditional for teaching. I was at the old person's home, or I was in the church hall, and I was relaying the kind of information that I was learning about Brooklyn's early free Black community, but also how Brooklyn has gotten to the state it's gotten into, which is almost one of the most unaffordable places in the United States at the moment. And how is it that we have had communities of color building that borough who are getting increasingly pushed out, right? And there's no sort of commemoration of them. So when I say I got my education, I really did get my education as a public historian. I was challenged on my authority, which in retrospect was the best education I ever had. I was challenged in terms of what is a Brit doing from Liverpool, talking about Brooklyn's history, how long have you been here, sweetheart? And I loved it. I was like, yeah, I'm learning about these neighborhoods. I'm a fraud here slightly. But at the same time, I think it gave me a grounding in what it means to be a historian who is committed, and I talk about this a lot with my students, talking about people and about legacies in which those people are in the room, right? And I think sometimes as scholars and as teachers who teach in traditional classrooms, we're often having conversations in which our scholarship speaks about inequality, and yet we're not inviting those people into the room. So having had that real form of education, I then moved on, and I'm one of the lucky ones to have got a tenure-track position at Bronx Community College. Our college, just in terms of demographic statistics, we are, I forget if it's 92 or 94. I think it's 92. We are 92% Hispanic and or Black. Our college is located in the poorest congressional district in the US. And I don't say that as a motto or as my cross to bear. I say that because the students that are coming into my classrooms are often teaching me every day about what it means to just commit to education as a form of social justice. And I say that because when I'm teaching historical literacy and I'm teaching these great terms that we come up with, I'm often having to break down myself what I mean by them, and also learning from them what they take from it in terms of their own experiences. And I say that also because I think what we do a lot of, and we were just talking about it earlier, is jargon, right? As scholars, and even as scholars who look at social inequality and social justice, we often use jargon. And I think a lot of my students, and I advocate for them strongly, they don't look like traditional students. They don't speak like traditional students, but they are so savvy when it comes to the communication and the the oral communication, rather, of suggesting how inequality affects them on an everyday basis, and how higher education is both sort of the promised land, but also a crock in a sense, because they don't know what they're getting out of it at the end. So it makes you value, or it makes you question what it is you're teaching them. That middle class dream is, you know, something that has a lot of flaws in it, and is that really what we're giving our students? So I would say, in terms of social justice, I'm learning so much from them in terms of what it means to be an educator in New York City, but also what it means to be a scholar and to be comfortable to be both de-authored and de-centered in terms of my position as the professor and who's really sort of doing the exchange of learning there. So thank you.
Oops, excuse me. Okay. We're gonna do this. There. Okay, and I'm going to start my stopwatch so that I'm on this too. Oops. Start. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about a project that I've been engaged with, the auspices of a network called FemTechNet. FemTechNet is a group of feminist scholars, activists, artists who work at the intersections of feminism, technology, and science as a kind of cultural project, not just an academic project. This group started in 2012 by myself and Alex Uhas as a way to create a network of people who are working across institutional domains who are kind of far-flung, meaning that if you do work in feminism and technology, you're often the only one doing that in your institution. There isn't a critical mass of us anywhere. And so what we needed to do was create some sort of way in which we could be present to one another, and we did the creation of this network. I'm going to talk about one of the first experiments that the group did that is still going on now. In the process of not only creating the network, but also this alternative MOOC, we engaged in many practices that you'll recognize as kind of practices of feminist process. I'm not going to go into those, but you know, it was from the very beginning kind of very self-conscious kind of effort at feminist organizing across domains, not just in the university, but in the community groups and activist groups, in libraries and so on. We created something that was kind of a response to all the hype that was going on with MOOCs. So MOOCs really came into the kind of public consciousness in October 2011. By April 2012, FemTechNet had gotten together a very large group of people to say, what would we do with response to the MOOCs if we were going to design a MOOC from a feminist perspective? Taking on exactly what Danica just said, which is how is this an opportunity not just to critique, but to actually do things differently. So we created something that's called a DOC, a Distributed Open Collaborative Course. And it's built on certain principles, right? That expertise is distributed throughout the network. It isn't located in any one institution, and it certainly isn't located in anyone's rank in terms of how they participate in the educational effort. Let's see here. Okay, the first doc was offered in fall of 2013. We're now going into our fourth year. These are the first institutions that participated. As a distributed network, that meant that the doc was taught at each of these institutions, including 3 community groups who got together with self-directed learners. And I won't go into the whole kind of details about how the nodes organize themselves, but we didn't have a common syllabus. We had a common set of objectives and a common set of learning activities. This was broadly and very widely interdisciplinary, mostly across the humanities and the social sciences. And here's the numbers of the doc at the end of 2013. So 2012, 2013, 27 instructors. We had more than 200 students, which again is a lot of students working on topics of feminism and technology. We had a number of drop-in learners who stayed with our courses throughout time. And I think the thing that we were the most proud of, and all the other things, the video dialogues and so on, those were just people accessing our shared online learning activities, was that we had a 99% completion rate, both for ourselves, our students in the classrooms, as well as the drop-in learners, which meant that we were outperforming traditional MOOCs by like 70%. It was based on kind of this notion that we would create shared resources that encourage distributed network dialogue, interaction, collaboration. I'm just going to go really quickly because I know I don't have much time. The basic components included a kind of a spine of what we were calling video dialogues. And the point of the video dialogues was to put 2 feminist thinkers, an activist, a scholar, a researcher, a community organizer, to put them in dialogue with one another, to model the way in which feminist knowledge is created through dialogue. So that this wasn't the notion of any one person kind of speaking about things, but how knowledge is negotiated across differences. We also had a shared activity called Keyword Videos. I'll talk a little bit about this activity called wiki storming that proved to be very contentious but very successful. And then there were a number of other things like gift exchange between nodes. So one group of students would make gifts for another group of students, and then they would circulate gifts, sort of like a secret Santa kind of thing, all kind of embodying some sort of feminist insight into an object, making an object that is not for yours to keep, but yours to give away. The video dialogues looked on these various topics that are important, things like the feminism, technology, and place, sexuality, race, difference, bodies, narratives. We did a thing on feminism, technology, and game design, and so on. And all of these things these video dialogues were pre-produced. They were released once a week. This is how people could follow along with the course. They could follow any syllabus they want. Each week we posted readings. So again, it wasn't that we were not grading kind of anyone who followed us on courses or giving course credit. The students who were in the nodal courses got course credit from the New School or from places. So let me just talk a little bit about the wiki storming activity. This was the project that I initiated, and it was really my reason for starting FemTechNet. We have no histories about the way in which women have engaged and contributed to the histories of science, technology, engineering, and medicine. So we started with this book, which is, many of you will recognize this. This is Autumn Stanley's book, Mothers and Daughters of Invention. It's a pretty big book. There are lots of names in here. And here's where we started. Pick a page. Does that woman have a page on Wikipedia? Oh, imagine that. She doesn't. Oh, let's pick another page. Imagine that. She doesn't. Imagine that. So our wiki storming was designed as a collaborative exercise across all the nodes to literally write women back into the histories of science, technology, engineering, and medicine as represented by our major cultural memory system, which is Wikipedia. And so that's what we did. We called it wiki storming because no more good girls. We're like, we're not waiting around for them to get us into Wikipedia. We're going to do it ourselves. Last thing to say, we did create some pages that should have been there, like the history of heresies. It should have been there. It hadn't been there. So, and along with there are about 300 edits and pages that we created. Just want to say, and I'll end on this, Fox News picked this up. They were outraged about it, and it created this incredible teachable moment where we could tell our students that there are people out here that think things like the closest a woman should get to a business is to shop at it, so that we didn't have to kind of rehearse for them that there may be people out there who are hostile to women taking on issues of science, technology, business, industry. And then last, I just want to leave with this. This is a way in which the network spawned things that the original organizers could not have realized. So the group has now created FemTechNet's Critical Race and Ethnic Studies Pedagogy Workbook. So as I started, with wiki storming, they are now working on the incredible kind of workbook that they pulled together about kind of non-racist and liberatory teaching. So thank you for your attention.
As we dance, it's a little treacherous back here. There's plenty of opportunities to trip and fall. All right, hi, how's everybody? Come on. Good. Thank you. All right, let me make time go. All right, my name is Ruthie Gilmore, and one of the things that Danica said about me in that nice, lovely, accurate introduction is that I do a lot of work on something called carceral geographies. I'm going to use a little specialized language for a brief time that might sound like jargon to some, but I think it's useful, and I don't find that anybody I spend 10 minutes with talking about these things can't understand what I'm talking about. One of the problems that we have in teaching about, learning about, and striving for social justice has been the tendency to make struggles parallel rather than overlapping and interlocking. And our obligation as educators, whatever kinds of educators we are, is to make clear that parallel has nothing to do with the social world. It is all overlapping. It is all interlocking. It doesn't mean that everything is equal, but it is all connected. So the specialized language I use to explain the meaning of the word contradiction is overlapping, co-constitutive interdependencies. Co-constitutive, these things make each other. Interdependencies, one would not exist without the other. This is how racism works, it's how capitalism works, it's how sexism works, it's how imperialism works, and so forth. So what is a university worth fighting for? It is a university that becomes a part of abolition geography, which is the antagonistic contradiction of carceral geography. And I make that claim on a world scale. An example of people fighting these days for a university that they want to fight for are the students and workers and fellow travelers in South Africa who have launched and been waging the Fees Must Fall movement. The Fees Must Fall movement is not merely focused on the cost of education for people who wish to go to school. It is also a fight to end outsourcing of workers who work in the school. It is also for changing the curriculum, the origin, social and otherwise, of faculty, and the relationship of the universities throughout South Africa to each other, to the African continent, and to the rest of the world. That is an abolition geography that is coming into being. It is not student services. I have nothing against student services, but one of the worst things that happened in the struggle to diversify post-secondary education in the United States of America is that what should have been central to the educational mission of our institutions became specialized offices to cater to the needs of students who were identified according to a vast range of categories. The Black students dean, the brown students dean, the white students dean, the gay students dean, the lesbian students dean, the transgender dean, the Muslim students dean, and so forth. I have nothing against all those deans. They should have jobs too. But that is not the way to create an abolition geography. Rather, what happened to me when I was a little lonely Black student, age 43, starting a PhD in geography at Rutgers University, was that my life was saved by the research librarians, the people who could show me the overlapping and interlocking struggles, who could show me how to learn what it was I wanted to learn. And that is the kind of work that I try to bring into my classroom here at the GC and elsewhere. Let me give you a couple of examples. I do a lot of courses that are studio courses, we could call them, research courses in which students organize themselves into groups to study particular problems. Many years ago, when I was an adjunct, I taught a course called Epistemologies of Diaspora. I wouldn't name it that again, but that's what I named it then at the time. I wouldn't name it that now. Epistemologies of Diaspora asked the students in the classroom to come up with explanations for why their forebears moved from one place to another. They didn't have to be immigrants, but they definitely moved. Everybody's got a moving story in their history. Everybody, indigenous or not. Why did you move? And then to compare what they learned by interviewing their grandparents and interviewing relatives and talking to people at their faith institutions and so on and so forth, to compare that with the standard history of migration and movement and displacement in the United States, and come up with an alternative explanation for why things happen where they do and why people live where and as they do. And this was a very powerful way for people to use autobiography, but use it in such a way that their individual story was not enough to understand the world. So I get very nervous when people pretend that an autobiography is enough. It isn't. The second example is a course I used to teach, again, undergraduate, called Carceral Geographies. Students also work in groups. I'm doing a graduate version of that this semester here at the GC, and try to figure out what actually happened on the ground in a prison town in California. This is where I used to teach it, where a new prison was established or refused. Who did what, where, when, how, and why. And the students could do this from any disciplinary or interdisciplinary perspective they wished, but they also had to work in groups. So we had artists working next to economists and social scientists working next to ballet dancers. Outside of the classroom, I've been privileged to participate in a number of pop-up universities in a working class of color community outside of Lisbon in Portugal. And these universities are organized by young people who themselves organize themselves to help their households and communities save their neighborhood from being erased in the name of urban renewal. And what the young people did, they aren't necessarily students, some of them are, some of them aren't, was to try to figure out by reading as widely and deeply as they could in the struggles against colonialism, against racism, and against capitalism on a world scale, where they fit and why it mattered. And I'd like to tell you that starting next year at my center, the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics, our postdoc will be one of the people who initiated these pop-up universities in Cova da Moura, Amadora, Lisbon. Sonia Vaz-Borges, a child of Cabo Verdean immigrants to Lisbon, who is finishing a PhD in education at Humboldt, where she is documenting the revolutionary education program of the PAIGC, that is the party that was headed most famously by Amilcar Cabral, that put into place during the 13 years education as the zones were liberated inch by inch by inch across Guinea-Bissau. That is the university we're fighting for. That is teaching for social justice, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Wow, good evening, everyone. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for doing such an awesome job. I appreciate you all telling the truth and getting to the nitty-gritty of what the university we're fighting for really is. And as Dr. Gilmore laid out, it is one about abolition. I've been meditating on a question that came up in the Twitter feed. I believe it was by my wonderful, brilliant colleague, Simone Brown. And she questioned, what does social justice feel and look like? We get criticized a lot as people of color for talking about the critiques that we have, and we get casted as the ones who are not doing anything. But what does it feel like, and how is that sometimes being discriminated against and being treated in a way that's socially unjust? How is that incapacitating in some ways? So I want to open up the floor to questions and see if you all have any other insights that you'd like to question or bring into the room. I think that would be lovely for this discussion. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, this is actually for Prithi. Can you tell us a little bit about your pedagogy and what does this kind of your philosophical approach to the classroom and this really dialogic approach that you set up mean for the day-to-day of how you structure your courses?
Yeah, absolutely. So with my classes, I often give the primary sources to the students, and they work in groups. So I don't like lecturing very much. I never did. I don't like the sound of my own voice. So for the first 5 minutes of class, I will set it up in terms of giving them the takeaway or the overall context that they need. And then they get put in groups and they work on primary sources, and what they realize quite quickly in my class is, oh, historians are interpreting things. That stuff that I've been learning, that's not actually history. And so you kind of empower them in that way. You show them historiography. So I always do Dunning and Foner next to each other to show how two historians with all this authority came to such radically different interpretations. My students do a lot of talking in my class, I guess is the really simple answer. And they're often presenting both to each other and back to me so that there's a dialogue going on.
What about writing?
In terms of writing, again, they do peer review, and they also write stuff for me. And I can guarantee you, when they do peer review, they actually write better for each other than they do for me. There's something to be said about I'm the professor, so they don't need to impress me. But when they write for each other, they're trying to impress each other. So we do a lot of that, and a lot of online writing as well. Yeah.
Any other questions? I have a question. Ruthie, in your work you talk about non-reformist reforms. Can you explain to folks what that really means in the context of social justice?
Okay, I can explain it perhaps most clearly by referring back to what I said about student services. Again, with all due respect to all the deans of student services in the room. Reformist reform maintains intact the very system that is the problem in the first place by making it appear not to be any longer what it was, right? And so the layering of student service deans and so on and so forth, in my generation, I started college in 1968, is an example of reformist reform. Non-reformist reform is doing the kind of work, given what we have. We have these buildings, Prithi has her classroom, and has her technological wizardry and so forth. So there are very different levels of what we have to change how people think about the work of the university, to use all of these materials and wring them out and wear them out in order to move forward. That's non-reformist reform. So at the end of the day, what we will have created in the form of consciousness, no less than education and diploma and so forth, is something new that matters.
Great, great. So in other words, not the changing same.
Not the changing same. Exactly.
Other questions?
I'm wondering about the case.
Okay. Did anyone have other questions? I think people really have an opportunity to raise their hand.
Yeah.
Okay. No, go ahead.
Oh, no, okay.
Okay. Do people have questions?
Actually, yeah, I do. Actually, thank you all for speaking, by the way, and especially Dr. Gilmore. That was fantastic. But kind of bouncing off of that, I have a question for Danica, actually. In your opening remarks, you mentioned that you just learned about all this inequality and everything in the classroom when you arrived at grad school. And if, I had a conversation with a friend and a colleague who's a person of color yesterday who said that, they had these discussions before they even go into kindergarten about what this system's going to be like. And we as white people are just learning about this, late. And I was wondering, what do you think that says about our system, and what kind of work do you do in terms of abolition to get rid of this system, and how can you inspire other white people to do the same? Because when abolition happens, we have to give up a tremendous amount of privilege. And I hear, a lot of white people talking all the time about how we need to, the reformist reform, we need to change things, we need to do this, how can we fix this, what new methodologies can we have? But at the end of the day, we're not giving up our privilege in doing it. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I'm glad you raised that. The work of learning how to be an effective ally is unending. It's every day. It's not something that you learn and then you're done. It's every single day is a struggle and a challenge to figure out what you can do, not to reproduce white privilege, how we can I think about the classroom a lot and what I teach and how I teach and how I engage with students. I teach in an English department, so often the texts that I teach, I try and teach texts that will allow me to have conversations with students about racial capitalism, which I don't think happens in every English class. I wish it did. So I try to engage students in these conversations, work with other people who are trying to make change in structures, in classrooms, in institutions. Always, bring in articles, things that are happening, make sure students are a lot of them are interested in talking about Black Lives Matter and things that are happening beyond the classroom. And it's such a surprise to me, how they express how infrequently they get to have these conversations in a classroom. To me, that's so disheartening, and it should be something that is taught in every single classroom. So that's, I guess, my immediate answer. But yeah, I really appreciate that question. I would love to hear if you have any also strategies, things that you try to do, any other, anyone else wanted to talk about what it's like being an ally in the academy.
I want to say something. I think the word ally is better.
Okay.
All right. Even though it feels like war, at the end of this war, if we win, the white people are not going to go home to white. And the black people go home to black, and the brown people go home to brown, and the transgender people go, wait a minute, what about white, black, brown, go home to transgender. That is not a good way of thinking, and I want to insist on that. It's not about being allies. It's about being willing, actually, to put our life to this struggle together. That's what I mean by overlapping and interlocking. And it's not about performing a bad me, I'm not a good ally. I mean, cut it out. The work that we have to do is the work to understand the world in order to change it, right? That is the work. You came here to study Marxism, all right? That's the takeaway from Marxism, right? That means reconfiguring our understanding of the possibility at the outset of what it is we're going to do. Get the military images out of our minds. Even though we're at war, we're fighting it in a different way because we're going to win. Because we were fighting a conventional war, we'd lose. We have more people, but less firepower. So you have to figure out a different way to win.
Other questions? That was awesome.
Yeah. No, I would be interested to know whether you would use the word compañeras instead of...
I say comrade all the time.
I do too.
Comrade scholars, I address you.
Yeah.
Comrade scholars, I depend on you. I mean, it's also about, you didn't come here just to hear me, so you guys just interrupt me. But I mean, another of the problems that goes with this overuse of the word or use of the word ally is, I think, a fatally weak understanding of the word power. People think that power is the thing that bad guys have, and what we have is something called agency. or authenticity. You know, that's a whole lot of hooey. You may tweet that, H-O-O-E-Y, hooey. What power is, the capacity to get somebody to do something they couldn't do on their own. Now, it sounds icky when you're thinking that power is a bad thing, but it sounds pretty wonderful when you realize that in most cases, power is terrific. I can help Prithi advance as a scholar. She can't do it all by herself. I can feed Prithi. I can make Prithi laugh. I can do many things that she can't necessarily do on her own. That has to do with power. That means that power and difference, as it constructs relations of dependency that are radical, are good things, not bad things. And we are equally dependent on each other, which means we have collectively a lot of power. The power that's bad is the power that leads to premature death. And that's the power I think we should be collected together as comrades to fight. But we've got to have power, or there's no point.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Speaking of Angela Davis, yes, she was mentioned here, so that's exactly, that's
Yeah, absolutely. So Prithi, you talked about when you're talking about these very critical and urgent and sensitive subjects, to always be mindful that the people that you're researching and talking about are in the room. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. And I'm sorry, could you just clarify slightly when I'm researching and writing?
Yeah, you said something about teaching, and sometimes when we're teaching, not just you, but all people in general, when we do this work, we have to be mindful that the people that we're researching are sometimes the same people who are in the room.
Right, sorry, yeah, thank you. So I look at free black communities in the 19th century, specifically in Brooklyn, but obviously I look at New York as a whole. And I find that when you're talking about legacies of, as a positive, what it looks like, what self-determination looks like, what self-sufficiency looks like, what safety and refuge looks like, you're talking the same themes to the same groups of people. They might not be of African descent, but communities of color who are oppressed are having the same dialogue. And so what I try not to do is teach it as, here's all the dates and here's all the stuff you must know. I'm teaching Seneca Village, or I'm teaching Weeksville, or I'm teaching before Dumbo got West Elm. There used to be a free black community there. I'm not teaching it like that. I'm teaching it as in, here are my themes, and I want you to start making the connections with me. And more often than not, they will, or if it's that point in the semester, which, you know, we're all exhausted, you give them the prompt. What does your perfect community look like? And so they dig into their own community, and they're doing the work of, if they had more power, what would they do differently? And they come up with stuff that is always the takeaway that I need, which is, guess what? People of color or communities of color or oppressed people have always wanted the same things. It is often stuff like education. I'd like a job. I would like safety, although that's such a subjective term, depending on what safety looks like. I would like more public spaces. And of course you get hilarious things like, I would like the guys at the bottom of my block to stop talking so loudly so I can sleep, right? It becomes that sort of micro. But you're really talking about the same thing. So I think for me, I allow the conversation to move if they want to talk about something that is relevant to them. Even though at community college, if any of you teach in the community college system in CUNY, you will know as the professor, it is a race against time. You are teaching from the colonial period through to Reagan is what I'm trying to do this semester in 16 weeks. So I'm constantly battling content and skills, and yet at the same time, I think out of respect for the fact that I am teaching this very diverse community in which I'm checking my own privilege constantly, I'm allowing that dialogue to happen, and that I'm slowing myself down, not freaking out and being like, oh my God, I'm off the syllabus completely. So that's one way.
Wow, that's awesome. I really like the fact that you do this interlocking, like you said, imaginative work with your students. I think that's very transformative. Other questions? You in the back here?
Yeah, I actually just have like a tactical question in the classroom. If I find that I try to keep the focus on structures and histories, but sometimes I feel like the students I have the most difficulty with have a compromise mentality and approach history as though it's something that can be compromised on because it seems like it might be too political to think that things are a problem. So I was wondering if anybody has any techniques for dealing with this sort of like, you know, like students on the far left or on the far right, I find are much more open to my material, but like the compromise idea, I just like get really stuck. Does that make any sense as a question? Any tactics for dealing with this from students?
I don't know if this is an answer or not, Stephanie. I'm not sure what your question was, but here's my answer anyway. My terrific friend, the great Jenna Lloyd, whose book, Health Rights or Civil Rights, everyone should read. Jenna worked as an adjunct for several years teaching in gender and women's studies at Cal State Fullerton, Southern California. And she was teaching, as this is not unlike in the community colleges, people who are stretched for time, who generally did not have time to read even if they wanted to, who are working all day and going to school at night or going to school all day and working all night, households, responsibilities, and so forth, i.e. just like life at CUNY. And Jenna was a fairly new teacher at the time and kept thinking that the problem was she wasn't a good enough lecturer or choosing the right reading materials or something. She kept internalizing her failure to inspire the students. So one day she came to me and we cried and calmed down. And I said, well, how about this? Why don't you try this? Go back to school and say, we're going to throw out the syllabus. And what I'd like us to do for the next 12 weeks together or 10 weeks together is examine why it is that the government of California, the current government of California, has made it impossible for you by cutting free money for school. Has made it impossible for people like you to get a college education that the state of California promised you. Make that the assignment. Everybody talked the whole semester. Everybody had something to say. People started reading the stuff that she handed out and so forth. So it wasn't perfect, but it was a way to get people to think about themselves in the context, which is what I understand Prithi's work to be doing, and what I understand Anne's work to be doing as well.
Right here?
I have a question for Andrews. How do you get involved in the doc? I was just trying to search for it online. When is it open?
It's femtechnet.org, and they're organizing now for the doc that will run in the fall. And it's a lot of self-organizing. No one pays for anything, and it's all bootstrap and stone soup. Who's got what? I mean, no institutions support it, and in this sense, not having money has been incredibly liberating because we are not beholden to any teaching and learning or institutional curriculum reviews. Many of us don't grade. We just, because we have the privilege not to grade.
So how do you do credits?
The students in different institutions get credit, but so for example, my students got credit but no grades. And other people, because of privilege, I'm a full professor, they're not going to fire me, right? So the adjunct faculty have to be a little bit more, constrained. But we teach across levels, and then I can show you if you want to look at the website and who to get in touch with.
I have a question. Do you have a question?
Yes. Also for Anne. I just returned last week. I was in Houston for a conference in composition and rhetoric and talked to teachers from all over the country. But we were in Texas, and I noticed that you're moving from New York, the new school, to Dallas, UT Dallas. I'm just wondering if you think, in terms of our topic today, social justice, have you been thinking about how things might be different there and how, how you'll approach things differently or maybe not?
Right. I know this isn't a conversation about my job transition, but every day I think about it. And mostly, and all of you will understand this, Texas is an open carry state as of August. And all of the, meaning you don't, if you have a license to carry a firearm, you can carry it openly. And the universities are public buildings, which means that technically it will be legal for students on this campus to open carry. And all of this kind of has just kind of come to, to the forefront because the law goes into that. So now we're talking about a scene where trigger warnings have much more than just metaphorical import. And the responses in the various Texas universities have been not very encouraging by administrators, who have, of course, come down on the side, don't do anything that will trigger something. So don't raise, difficult topics, don't do this, and so on. So that's one side of the reaction. The other side of the reaction, at the new school, I deal with trigger warnings all the time. And our students push everything to the limits on both sides, right? If they think they're being prohibited from learning anything difficult, they will be very provocative, and they get very sensitive about things that kind of destabilize, their equilibrium. So, I'm sure you all as well, right? There's kind of extremes on both ends. So now I'm walking into a situation where that's going to happen. Those who will be triggered by something and those who will be upset because somebody's holding back because of a trigger sensibility. And then you have in the middle what could be a more literally volatile situation. I'm going to tell you, I think it's good that I'm going to be there because I support academic freedom from beginning to end. And so I would not advocate anything about trigger warnings. I think it's up to the individual in the classroom. And then I also just have to remind people, when I took my first position at Georgia Tech teaching feminism, science, technology, and gender, it was 6 months after the Montreal massacre that happened, where 27 young women were gunned down in a polytechnic in Montreal because they were damn feminists in an engineering school taking spots away from male engineers. So if you teach certain things in this country or in the kind of systems I'm familiar with, this won't be the first time that you've had to confront the fact that maybe what you teach could actually be putting your life on the line in ways that you didn't even understand. So that's not an excuse for what's going to happen in Texas, but it's also not the first time I certainly have had to deal with the fact that going into an engineering school like Georgia Tech was not going to be well received by people who had access to guns. Georgia.
Any other questions?
There's a question on Twitter. Someone is asking about how character and identity development, I presume for the students, can be woven into social justice pedagogy. And they're asking, can that type of development in a classroom environment be measured? Should it be measured?
Would you mind repeating the question too for the...
Sure. The question was about identity and character development in a classroom of developing like a pedagogy around social justice.
Thank you.
Sorry.
And can it be measured?
Can it be measured?
What I'm reading into this is if you're incorporating an element of identity development into your pedagogy, can that also be a part of what you're assessing in the classroom space?
Wow.
I'm not sure if that's what the person intends or not.
Well, whoever tweeted that question may want to tweet a clarification. I mean, my gut reaction says, no, that's ridiculous, frankly. I mean, but then we could have another, we already had a discussion, I guess, this year about assessment, but we could reconvene on that topic, which is deadly. The fact that we welcome, and tell me what you think, Prithi, but the fact that we are trying to engage people from where they're at, i.e. their identities, however they self-describe, into whatever it is we are asked to teach, colonialism through Reagan, that there isn't anything about their character development or their identity development. What we want to do is develop them as thinkers and knowers in the world and use whatever doors they can pass through to get there. Is that fair?
Yeah. No, and I don't know what character means in that context. I could talk about self-esteem. I think I think when students of color don't think history is about them and they are starting to learn about narratives in which they see themselves or their ancestors, I think in terms of self-esteem, you can see the self-esteem and their confidence boost. I wouldn't want to measure that though. No, I don't want to go down that road. But yeah, I think that's something.
Other questions? Yeah.
So I have this question about factors of identity. Because I'm wondering, for a public health course that I took, part of the assignment addressing the paper you're going to do is writing a reflection on yourself and identifying the things about you that will end up being part of how you interpret the data that you're reading. So owning the fact that data is all interpreted no matter what kind of data and where you are coming from. And so we were assessed on whether or not we were honest with ourselves, right? It wasn't that like you have to identify a certain way, which is like, are you being honest about what it is that will go into your interpretation of the work that you're doing and how are you going to be doing this, and what type of lenses you have access to.
I still think that assessment is bogus, though. Who like can get in your head and see how you're faking it and how you're being truthful?
But
do you understand what I'm saying?
Trying to do that assignment, I think, right? Whether or not you're willing to engage with it might be something that you can miss. Like, if I do it, if I don't, if I take it seriously, if I don't, whether or not you can't do it correctly, I don't think, right?
That's what I mean about the bogus
but
assessment.
Whether or not you're willing to engage with this type of, I guess, pedagogy or like thing,
Yeah. I'm not saying you're bogus. I'm saying it is bogus.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up here. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you coming out for support. We understand that you can be a million other places, especially in this busy and beautiful city. So we'd like to thank you. You can join us next. Well, we have another event coming up that is on the 19th. So you'll find out more about that later. So thank you.